What happens when the golden spoon clashes with the cold, hard scales of justice? We've all seen the headlines, haven't we? Cases where it feels like money talks and justice whispers. But what happens when that whisper becomes a roar, echoing the lived experiences of those often overlooked, those whose voices have been silenced for too long? Today, we're diving deep into a story that peels back the layers of privilege, revealing just how fragile that gilded cage can be when confronted with unwavering truth. This isn't just about a spoiled rich kid. It's a mirror reflecting a pervasive societal issue, challenging our very notion of fairness and accountability, especially for the Black and brown communities who know intimately the sting of injustice. Get ready, because this is one lesson you won't forget. What happens when the golden spoon clashes with the cold, hard scales of justice? We've all seen the headlines, haven't we? Cases where it feels like money talks and justice whispers. Today, we're diving deep into a story that peels back the layers of privilege, revealing just how fragile that gilded cage can be when confronted with unwavering truth. This isn't just about a spoiled rich kid, it's a mirror reflecting a societal issue that cuts deep, challenging our very notion of fairness. Meet Serafina Thorne. Her world was a meticulously crafted masterpiece of opulence, shimmering under the constant sunshine of Beverly Hills. From her sprawling mansion overlooking the city, where infinity pools met endless skies, to the private jets that whisked her away on a whim, Serafina lived a life where no was simply a word other people heard. Designer labels weren't just clothes, they were a second skin. Rules weren't for her. They were inconvenient suggestions for the masses. She existed in a velvet cage, a fortress built not of steel, but of inherited wealth and unearned influence. And within that cage, a peculiar form of blindness flourished. Privilege blindness. It's that invisible wall that prevents you from seeing beyond your own comfort, from understanding the very real consequences your actions have on those outside your gilded bubble. But even the most impenetrable fortresses can have a crack, and for Serafina, that crack was about to appear in the unlikely setting of the Los Angeles County Courthouse. That morning, the courtroom buzzed with a quiet, almost reverent tension. Every seat was filled. Whispers rippled through the gallery, and a palpable sense of anticipation hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just another routine hearing. This was about Serafina Thorne, a name synonymous with reckless abandon and an inflated sense of self. She was due to stand before Judge Elias Vance. Now, Judge Vance was a different breed entirely. His reputation preceded him, a man of unwavering integrity, a sharp intellect honed by decades navigating the labyrinthine complexities of justice. He was known for his unshakable demeanor, a quiet authority that commanded respect without a single raised voice. To him, the law wasn't a suggestion, it was the bedrock of a functioning society, and everyone, regardless of their last name or bank account, stood equal before it. He was precisely the kind of man Serafina Thorne had never truly encountered. The courtroom fell silent as the door opened, but it wasn't the judge who entered. It was Serafina. She arrived in her usual fashion, late, unapologetic, and utterly oblivious. Draped in the latest haute couture, oversized sunglasses still perched on her nose, she sauntered into the room as though it were a red carpet event, not a hallowed space of law. Her lawyer, a visibly uncomfortable man, walked quickly behind her, desperately trying to minimize the spectacle. Eyes shifted, whispers died, and the courtroom, usually a bastion of solemn decorum, held its breath. Serafina stopped in the middle of the aisle, seemingly oblivious to the people waiting for her to take a seat. With a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, she motioned for her lawyer to move aside so she could set her designer bag down on the bench, as if it were her personal lounge. Her entitlement radiated like heat, palpable to everyone in the room. She removed her sunglasses with an exaggerated flourish, glancing around as if this entire proceeding were utterly beneath her. It was a masterclass in disdain, a brazen display of exactly what privilege blindness looks like. Just moments later, Judge Vance entered. The air in the room changed instantly, the murmurs dying down, replaced by a respectful hush that seemed to vibrate with his calm authority. In his mid-50s, he was an imposing figure, tall and self-assured. His sharp eyes scanned the room briefly, taking in every detail before settling into his chair. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Serafina hesitated, clearly irritated, before standing with a heavy sigh. Her expression screamed, "Why am I even here?" Judge Vance didn't react. He simply adjusted his glasses, opened the file before him, and began the proceedings. Serafina's case was, on paper, fairly straightforward. A series of parking violations compounded by a recent incident of reckless driving that had endangered a pedestrian. But what could have been a routine hearing was about to take a dramatic turn, not because of the law itself, but because of Serafina's unwavering, almost defiant arrogance. Her privilege had insulated her for so long that she had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, the fundamental truth. Even in the most gilded cages, there are bars of justice. And as Judge Vance began outlining the charges, the real lesson was about to begin. As Judge Vance's calm, resonant voice began outlining the charges, the air in the courtroom, already thick with anticipation, grew almost suffocating. He spoke with measured precision, detailing Serafina's lengthy record of minor infractions, culminating in the serious, reckless driving charge, and the hit-and-run incident involving Mr. Desmond Hayes, a 68-year-old retired history teacher. But as the judge spoke of endangering a life, Serafina's posture shifted, not with concern, but with increasing contempt. She leaned back in her plush chair, crossed her arms, and then, slowly, deliberately, rolled her eyes. It was a blatant, almost theatrical sign of disrespect, a clear message that this entire proceeding was an annoyance, not a consequence. You'd expect a reaction, wouldn't you? A sharp rebuke, a gavel slam, but Judge Vance merely carried on, his professionalism an impenetrable shield. His tone remained even, his words deliberate, almost daring her to continue her act. The tension in the room began to coil tighter. Even the most seasoned court regulars sat up a little straighter, sensing a storm brewing beneath the judge's calm surface. But Serafina, enveloped in her bubble of entitlement, was oblivious to the tempest she was inviting. She had no intention of backing down. With every word Judge Vance spoke, her irritation seemed to grow, becoming more pronounced, more performative. She began tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the polished wooden table, a sharp, incessant rhythm loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, his face a mask of escalating panic, but Serafina merely waved him off with a dismissive flick of her hand. The room, already tense, seemed to hold its breath. Then came the moment of direct address. Judge Vance asked her to confirm her identity. She barely glanced up, a bored sigh escaping her lips. "Yeah, that's me," she drawled, her tone dripping with indifference. A collective murmur rippled through the room, a wave of disbelief. Judge Vance's expression remained perfectly calm, though his eyes lingered on Serafina for a moment longer than usual. A flicker, almost imperceptible, that held a world of unspoken meaning. "Miss Thorne," he began, his voice steady, "in this courtroom we adhere to a certain level of decorum. I suggest you adjust your tone accordingly." Serafina smirked, as though the judge's words were some sort of ridiculous joke. She leaned back even further, twirling a strand of her blonde hair between her fingers, a childish mocking gesture. "Sure thing, Your Honor," she said, her voice laced with heavy, undeniable sarcasm. Soft gasps echoed through the room. The court reporter paused briefly, her fingers hovering over the keys. Even Serafina's lawyer buried his face in his hands, visibly mortified, yet Judge Vance remained unflappable. "Miss Thorne," he said again, his voice firm but still calm, "do you understand the charges brought against you today?" She rolled her eyes again, this time an audible sigh escaping her lips. "Honestly, no. I mean, it's just some dumb parking tickets. And what, someone getting scared because I hit the gas too hard? This is a waste of time." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes now were on Judge Vance. He carefully closed the folder in front of him. He removed his glasses, placing them deliberately on the bench. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had paused. "Miss Thorne," he said slowly, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight, an undercurrent of something profound about to shift. "I would advise you to choose your words carefully from this point forward." The gravity of his tone caused even the most disinterested spectators to sit up, a sense of impending consequence filling the air. But Serafina, still utterly oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, simply shrugged. "What? It's true," she said, leaning forward this time, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing her face. "It's not like I hurt anyone. This whole thing is ridiculous." What Serafina failed to realize was that her words were no longer falling on deaf ears. Judge Vance's silence, his deliberate actions, spoke volumes. The courtroom was about to witness a response they would never forget, a revelation that would crack the carefully constructed facade of her velvet cage. Judge Vance leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Serafina. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Even Serafina's lawyer, who had been shuffling papers nervously, stopped, casting an anxious glance at the judge. "You believe this is ridiculous, Miss Thorne?" Judge Vance asked, his tone steady, almost conversational. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it was impossible to ignore. Serafina scoffed. "Yeah, I do. I mean, come on, it's not like I robbed a bank or something. This is just overkill." She waved her hand dismissively, as though brushing away an imaginary nuisance. Judge Vance nodded slowly, folding his hands on the bench. "I see," he said, his calm demeanor only heightening the suspense, making the spectators edge closer to the edge of their seats. "Let me clarify something for you, Miss Thorne. The charges against you include not only reckless driving, but also endangering a pedestrian's life. The law does not measure accountability by the size of the crime, but by its impact. Do you understand that?" Serafina rolled her eyes yet again, muttering under her breath, "Sure, sure, whatever you say." The whisper was soft, but it carried in the profound silence of the courtroom. The judge's face remained composed, but there was a subtle shift, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a pause that signaled something pivotal was about to change. "Ms. Thorne," Judge Vance began, his voice still calm, "do you recall the incident from 2 weeks ago, the one that brought you here today?" Serafina shrugged, looking bored. "Some guy stepped off the curb, I honked, he moved, end of story." The judge raised his eyebrows. "End of story, you say?" "Yeah," she said, crossing her arms. "No harm, no foul." But Judge Vance wasn't finished. He reached for a document on the bench, flipping through it with measured precision. Then he addressed the courtroom, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "Let the record show," he said, "that the pedestrian in question, Mr. Desmond Hayes, was a 68-year-old retired history teacher. He was crossing the street legally when Miss Thorne accelerated toward him, causing him to stumble, fall, and sustain a severe wrist injury. He has since required extensive medical attention and continues to experience significant pain and limited mobility." Serafina's smirk faltered for the first time. She glanced at her lawyer, who whispered something to her, but she waved him off again. "I didn't hit him," she muttered, her voice softer, tinged with a flicker of something akin to defensiveness. "He was fine." "Miss Thorne," Judge Vance continued, now directing his full attention back to her, his gaze unwavering, "does this sound like no harm, no foul to you?" Before Serafina could open her mouth to reply, a movement from the gallery caught her eye. A man in the second row. He sat quietly, his arm in a sling, his weathered face showing no anger, only a kind of quiet, profound disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any harsh words ever could. It was Mr. Desmond Hayes. His presence, his quiet dignity, was the first real crack in Serafina's carefully constructed world, and it was about to become abundantly clear that her actions had far-reaching consequences. Consequences she could no longer ignore. The show was over. The lesson was about to begin. Judge Vance's steady gaze remained fixed on Serafina, his voice measured as he continued. "Miss Thorne, your perspective on this matter is troubling, not because of the charges themselves, but because of your refusal to acknowledge the weight of your actions." Serafina leaned back in her chair, feigning nonchalance, though the growing tension in the room was impossible to miss. "Look, I said I didn't hit him," she muttered, a defensive edge to her voice. "People are so dramatic these days." That comment elicited a few more gasps from the courtroom gallery. Judge Vance tapped his pen lightly against the desk, pausing for a moment before speaking again. "Dramatic? he repeated, his tone still even, almost inviting her to consider the word. Would you like to hear from Mr. Hayes himself, Miss Thorne? Because he's here today in this courtroom. The air grew thick with anticipation. Serafina's confident facade wavered, her eyes darting briefly toward the gallery, where Mr. Hayes sat quietly. His arm was still in a sling, his weathered face showing no anger, only a kind of quiet disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any harsh words could. Serafina shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but her defiance wasn't entirely gone. "I'm sure he's fine," she muttered, though her voice lacked its earlier bravado. Judge Vance leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding the room. "Ms. Thorne, your dismissal of this man's pain speaks volumes about your character. But this isn't just about him. It's about the precedent we set when individuals of privilege believe they are above accountability." The courtroom was so silent that even the faint scratch of the court reporter's pen could be heard. All eyes were on Judge Vance now, waiting to see what he would do next. Then, with a calm that belied the immense weight of his words, he said, "Since you seem unconcerned about the consequences of your actions, perhaps it's time you experience them firsthand." Serafina blinked, her earlier bravado crumbling. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine worry for the first time. Judge Vance didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the bailiff, who handed him a small stack of papers. The judge began reading aloud, detailing the fines, the mandatory community service, and the court-ordered sensitivity training Serafina would need to complete. These were standard penalties, expected for her offenses, but it wasn't the fines themselves that made the biggest impact. It was the way he delivered them, weaving in a powerful message about privilege, empathy, and the responsibility that comes with living in a shared society. He spoke of the legal repercussions, yes, but also of the moral ones, making it clear that the court's judgment extended beyond mere statutes. But what truly shook Serafina and the entire courtroom, what caused a collective gasp that reverberated through the hall, was the unexpected final decision Judge Vance announced, one that would make her confrontation with reality unavoidable, truly dragging her from her velvet cage into a world she never knew existed. Judge Vance set the papers down, his gaze steady and unwavering. The weight of his next words seemed to fill the room before they were even spoken. "Miss Thorne," he began, "I have reviewed the details of this case extensively. Given the severity of your actions and your blatant disregard for accountability, I am issuing a sentence that I believe will not only address the legal violations, but also provide you with a much-needed perspective." Serafina sat up straighter, her earlier flippancy replaced by a flicker of genuine unease. "Perspective?" she echoed, her voice edged with disbelief. "Yes," Judge Vance said firmly. "In addition to the fines and 200 hours of community service, you will spend the next 30 days volunteering at the Beacon of Hope Women's Shelter in downtown Los Angeles. You will work directly with individuals who have faced hardship, often through no fault of their own. Perhaps then, you'll understand the impact of carelessness and entitlement." A collective murmur spread through the room. This wasn't the typical sentence one expected in a case like this. The crowd's mixed reactions were palpable. Some nodded in approval, others exchanged incredulous glances. But the most telling reaction came from Serafina herself. "You've got to be kidding me!" she exclaimed, her voice rising in a squeal of indignation. "You want me to what? Hang out with homeless people? That's not my problem." Judge Vance's face didn't change, but his voice grew colder, cutting through her protest like a sharp blade. "Ms. Thorne, it is precisely that mindset that landed you in this courtroom today. Your actions reflect a lack of understanding, a refusal to see how your choices affect those around you. This is not a punishment. It is an opportunity for growth. And let me be clear, failure to comply will result in a much harsher sentence." Serafina's lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, his eyes wide with warning, but she yanked her arm away. "This is insane. You can't force me to do this." Judge Vance raised a hand, silencing her outburst. Ms. Thorne, this court has the authority to enforce community service as part of your sentence. You will report to the shelter by 8 a.m. each morning, and your supervisor will provide weekly progress updates. Should you fail to cooperate, I will see you back in this courtroom under far less favorable circumstances. The room was silent again, the weight of Judge Vance's words hanging heavily in the air. Serafina's face flushed with anger, but for once, she said nothing. She simply sat there, stunned and silent. But the moment wasn't over yet. Judge Vance had one final set of remarks, words that would leave a lasting impression not just on Serafina, but on everyone in the room. He adjusted his glasses, his calm demeanor unshaken despite Serafina's visible defiance. He let the silence stretch for a moment, ensuring his next words would land with full force. "Miss Thorne," he began, his voice taking on a softer, almost reflective tone. "This courtroom does not exist to humiliate or belittle. It exists to uphold justice and, when possible, to teach. Your privilege has shielded you from consequences for far too long, and that has cost you the ability to empathize. This is not about punishment. It's about helping you reclaim your humanity." The courtroom held its collective breath. Serafina, clearly uncomfortable, glanced at the gallery, her bravado slipping further. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but seemed to think better of it. "Do you know what Mr. Hayes said when asked about his feelings toward you?" Judge Vance asked, his voice softer now, almost conversational. Serafina shook her head, her eyes darting to Mr. Hayes, who remained seated in the gallery. His expression was still one of quiet disappointment, a poignant reflection of what Serafina had done. "He said," Judge Vance continued, his voice clear and resonant, "I don't want her to suffer. I just want her to understand. Because if she doesn't, she'll keep hurting people, and one day it might be something she can't undo." The words landed like a hammer. Serafina's face turned pale, her usual composure unraveling. For the first time, her defiance gave way to something else entirely: discomfort, perhaps even genuine guilt. Judge Vance didn't let up. "Mr. Hayes, a man you nearly injured has chosen grace over anger. He could have pressed for harsher penalties, but he asked for something different, an opportunity for you to learn. That's what this sentence represents." Serafina shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her confidence eroded. The room was so quiet that every small sound, the shuffle of papers, the creak of a bench, seemed amplified. "You will report to the Beacon of Hope Women's Shelter on Monday morning," Judge Vance continued, his voice firm. "There, you'll meet women who have faced challenges you cannot begin to imagine. Some have lost everything. Some are rebuilding their lives from the ground up. You will listen to their stories, and in doing so, I hope you begin to understand the value of humility and accountability." Serafina looked as though she wanted to protest, but the overwhelming weight of the moment seemed to hold her tongue. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, signaling for her to stay quiet. The gavel came down with a sharp, resounding crack, signaling the end of the hearing. "This court is adjourned," Judge Vance announced, his voice firm as he rose from his seat and exited the courtroom. The tension in the room seemed to linger, like a storm that had just passed but left its indelible mark. Serafina remained seated, her face a mixture of disbelief and indignation. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering hurriedly, but she barely acknowledged him. The gallery began to empty, the murmurs of the onlookers rising as people discussed what they had just witnessed. Mr. Hayes stood slowly, his slung arm a stark reminder of the incident that had brought them all here. He glanced at Serafina as he passed, his expression still kind but resolute. She avoided his gaze, staring instead at the table in front of her. But even as the judge's words began to sink in, the real transformation wouldn't truly begin until Serafina stepped outside the sheltered bubble of her privilege and faced the raw realities waiting for her. The journey from the velvet cage to true humanity was only just beginning. The tension in the courtroom lingered long after Judge Vance's gavel fell, a storm that had just passed but left its indelible mark. Serafina remained seated, her face a mixture of disbelief and indignant fury. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering hurriedly, his voice a frantic buzz, but she barely acknowledged him. She was lost in a swirling vortex of anger and fear, the reality of her sentence finally beginning to claw its way into her carefully constructed world. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered, a hungry swarm eager to capture the fallout from the dramatic hearing. Serafina's name, already a tabloid staple for her socialite antics, was now linked to a moment of courtroom drama that had captivated everyone in attendance. Cameras flashed like strobe lights as she emerged, flanked by her lawyer, who shielded her from the barrage of questions. "Miss Thorne, do you have any comment on today's sentencing?" one reporter called out. "Do you feel the sentence was fair? What are your thoughts on Judge Vance's decision?" Serafina's usual arrogance resurfaced for a fleeting moment. "No comment," she snapped, pushing past the crowd and into the waiting luxury car. But inside, the facade began to crack. As the doors closed, sealing her off from the noise of the reporters, her shoulders slumped. For the first time, it seemed, reality was truly setting in. The story was the top headline across news outlets that evening. Clips from the courtroom, including Judge Vance's powerful words, went viral, sparking widespread decision. Social media lit up with opinions, some praising the judge's bold decision, others criticizing Serafina's behavior. But the most poignant commentary came from Mr. Desmond Hayes, who gave a brief statement outside the courthouse, his voice gentle but firm. "I don't want her to fail," he said. "I just hope she learns, because when we stop learning, we stop growing, and that's when we truly lose." The simplicity of his words struck a chord, resonating far beyond the confines of the courtroom. For Serafina, though, the lesson was only just beginning. Monday loomed ahead, a stark, unwelcome reality. With it came a world far removed from her designer handbags, luxury cars, and privileged lifestyle. She spent the weekend in a state of agitated denial, the comfortable walls of her velvet cage feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. But what Serafina would soon discover was that real, transformative change doesn't come from being told. It comes from seeing, from doing, and most profoundly, from feeling the raw weight of someone else's reality. Monday arrived with an unfamiliar chill for Serafina, both in the crisp morning air of downtown Los Angeles and in the pit of her chest. She stood outside the Beacon of Hope women's shelter, her oversized sunglasses hiding the hesitation in her eyes, a last vestige of her old self. The building was modest, bustling with activity, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of her mansion. Volunteers and staff hurried about, their faces etched with purpose. For the first time in a long, long while, Serafina felt utterly, completely out of place. It was a sensation both unnerving and, though she wouldn't admit it, strangely grounding. As she stepped inside, the warm hum of voices and the clatter of kitchen utensils greeted her, a symphony of genuine human activity. A staff member, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and kind eyes, approached her. "You must be Serafina," she said, her tone friendly but firm. "Welcome. Let's get you started." The hours passed, slowly at first, each minute a grinding test of her patience. Serafina was assigned to help prepare meals, serve food, and clean up afterward. She didn't speak much, keeping her head down, her usual bravado stripped away by the unfamiliarity and the sheer weight of her new surroundings. She was a fish out of water, awkward and out of sync. But as the day wore on, something subtle began to shift. She began to notice things she hadn't before: the profound gratitude in the smiles of the shelter's guests, the easy camaraderie among the staff, and the quiet resilience in the fragments of stories she overheard. One woman, a single mother of 3 named Maria, shared her struggles with Serafina over lunch. Maria's voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of years of hardship, of battles fought and often lost. Yet she spoke without a trace of self-pity. "You think you've got it all figured out," Maria said, her tired but strong eyes meeting Serafina's, "but life has a way of teaching you what really matters. It strips away all the noise until you're left with just the truth." That night, as Serafina drove home, the familiar comfort of her luxury car felt different. Her thoughts were uncharacteristically quiet, no longer consumed by anger or self-pity. The faces of the people she'd met lingered in her mind, Maria's words echoing, along with Judge Vance's pronouncement about empathy. For the first time in her life, Serafina began to wonder if there was more to life than the meticulously crafted world she had built for herself. A world of privilege, isolation, and superficiality. She realized with a startling clarity that sent a shiver down her spine that her velvet cage, once a symbol of freedom, had actually been a prison. And the journey to truly break free was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed that jarring first day, Serafina's mandatory service at the Beacon of Hope continued. Day by day, the formidable walls she had built around herself, those invisible barriers of privilege and indifference, began to crack. She listened more, spoke less, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something within her began to change. The faces of the women at the shelter, Maria with her quiet strength, an elderly woman who had lost everything in a house fire, a young mother fleeing an impossible situation, became more than just anonymous figures. They became teachers. Serafina learned to prepare meals with care, to serve with respect, and to clean not out of obligation, but out of a growing understanding of shared humanity. The stories she heard, the quiet struggles she witnessed, chipped away at her self-absorption, replacing it with a nascent sense of empathy. By the time her 30-day sentence was complete, Serafina Thorne stood before Judge Vance once more. But this time, the woman who entered the courtroom was profoundly different. The arrogant socialite, draped in disdain, was gone. In her place was a quieter, more introspective version of herself, her posture no longer defiant but poised with a newfound humility. She looked directly at Judge Vance, her voice steady, tinged with a sincerity that was utterly alien to her old self. "Thank you," she said, a simple phrase laden with immense meaning. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Judge Vance nodded, his face softening just slightly. The stern lines around his eyes eased, revealing a hint of approval. "The real thanks," he replied, his voice still calm but carrying a gentle warmth, "will come when you take what you've learned and use it to make a difference." As Serafina left the courthouse that day, the sun shining brightly overhead, she carried something small but powerful: hope. It was a chance to rebuild, not just her life, but her entire perspective. The paparazzi were still outside, though perhaps a little less frenzied. They snapped photos, reporters called out questions, but this time, Serafina didn't snap back. She didn't retreat into a shell of arrogance. Instead, she paused, took a deep breath, and for the first time looked at them, not as an invading force, but as people. She offered a small, genuine smile, not a smirk, but a smile that reached her eyes. She had no comment for them, but the shift in her demeanor spoke volumes. Her journey, from the velvet cage of privilege to the raw reality of the shelter, became a powerful reminder to everyone: change is possible. It might not be easy, and it rarely happens in the comfort of our familiar bubbles. It takes humility, the courage to confront one's deepest flaws, and the willingness to truly see the world, and the people in it, through different eyes. Serafina Thorne, the once ditzy rich girl, had not just completed a sentence, she had started a profound transformation. The echo of empathy, once a faint whisper in her privileged world, had now become a resonant force, guiding her toward a reclaimed humanity. Her story reminds us that true change is possible. It might not be easy, and it rarely happens in the comfort of our familiar bubbles. It takes humility, the courage to confront one's deepest flaws, and the willingness to truly see the world and the people in it through different eyes. This isn't just Serafina's story. It's a testament to the quiet dignity of individuals like Mr. Desmond Hayes, a Black man whose grace and desire for understanding sparked a profound shift. It's a reminder that justice, true justice, isn't just about punishment. It's about perspective, growth, and holding everyone, regardless of their background, accountable to the same moral standard. It's about ensuring that the scales of justice are balanced for everyone, especially those who have historically been marginalized. What lessons has life taught you? How have you stepped outside your own comfort zone to understand someone else's reality? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's build a community of understanding, growth, and justice together. And if this story moved you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or a desire for change, Make sure to like this video, subscribe for more stories that inspire reflection and growth, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a powerful lesson. Your engagement helps us amplify these important messages and keep the conversation going.